Tonight, Saskatchewan declares a state of emergency as wildfires rage out of control.
It's a very serious situation that we're faced with.
Across the prairies, thousands forced from their homes.
Everybody was just scared because we never know what's going to happen.
And a Manitoba First Nation cut off, now airlifting residents as a wildfire closes in. A U.S. appeals court allows Trump's tariffs less than 24 hours after they were deemed illegal.
Even if we lose, we will do it another way.
Where this leaves Canada. One of the former World Junior players testifies in his own defense.
It is ultimately their choice.
What Carter Hart says happened in the London hotel room.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. Saskatchewan is under a state of emergency tonight. Now the second Prairie province to declare one in as many days. This early wildfire season has taken hold with increased ferocity. Already, at least 44 structures have been lost in Saskatchewan, with drone footage showing just a fraction of that destruction. And officials concerned conditions are about to get worse. Right now, dozens of fires are out of control right across the prairies. But among the most concerning tonight, a fire in central Saskatchewan, about 300 kilometers northeast of Saskatoon. It's named the Shoe Fire, and it's burned through well over 200,000 hectares. People in the region have been forced to head south to safety. Alexander Silberman now with the escalating situation and how those evacuees are coping.
Did you hear those trees?
Lisa Highway says she barely made it out of Pelican Narrows.
I'm glad we made it on time.
Her dangerous journey fleeing her home took her to the only road out of town, with a wall of flames mere meters away.
My baby is 4 years old. He was pretty scared seeing all that. Yeah, traumatized baby. Because he keeps asking me every day, are we going to go home? Did our house blow up?
It's a very serious situation that we're faced with in Saskatchewan.
Premier Scott Moe declaring a state of emergency, a move he says reflects the gravity of the situation.
The conditions that we're facing and the conditions that our northern residents, communities, and our wildland fighters are facing today are as severe or quite likely more unlikely anything that we have faced for quite some period of time, if not ever.
Hot and dry conditions have led to fires tearing through the north, destroying more than 40 structures so far. The province's top wildfire officials warning it's expected to get worse.
All of us need to pull together to get through this over the next days, weeks, but we will get through this, but we have to do it together.
More than 4,000 people in the province are under mandatory evacuation orders. Many have fled to Saskatoon and Prince Albert. The province's largest fire, one of 8 burning out of control, is more than 200,000 hectares, nearly 10 times the size of Saskatoon. It's now threatening the village of Candle Lake, home to more than 9,000 people in the summer months.
People are very anxious, very concerned. Those that, everybody's doing their own due diligence as far as being ready to leave at the drop of a hat. People are scared, and rightfully so. The community asking vulnerable residents to leave now before conditions get worse, hoping desperately for some relief.
The best thing that we can hope for in this situation is a good, solid 3 or 4 day rain.
Unfortunately, there's no sign of rain in the forecast, Adrian. The conditions on the ground here are incredibly hot and dry, making this brush like tinder. So crews are working in the forest behind me to cut a fire break and try and stop the flames from reaching town.
And Alexander, it seems that these fires are already threatening key roads in the north, some of which, as I understand it, are the only way out of town.
That's a growing concern tonight, and the Premier says by declaring this state of emergency, it'll make it easier for more widespread evacuations, including getting people to safety by air if it's the only way out.
Okay, Alexander Silberman in Candle Lake, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is far from alone. Around 300 kilometers northeast, a massive fire remains out of control on the Manitoba border. It's forced the evacuation of Flin Flon. That's a city of about 5,000 people in Manitoba, all of whom have been ordered to leave. Many of those evacuees had to make the 800-kilometer drive to Winnipeg. Cameron McIntosh now with what they went through and the uncertainty they now face.
With an out-of-control wildfire now just 2 kilometers outside of Flin Flon, most residents didn't take long to heed the evacuation order. 200 kilometers down the highway, traffic bumper to bumper.
It's been a real whirlwind.
Noelle Drimmy and her family fled this. Driving 5 hours south, now staying with friends, attempting to stay calm.
I'm trying not to kind of go into that worst case scenario mode. I really do feel for all our firefighters that are staying behind.
This is Rico.
Gina Malate just happy her family is safe after an 8-hour drive to an evacuation center in Winnipeg.
There's lots of what if there's a fire ahead of us, and then we're going to be trapped. So it's very scary.
The city of about 5,000 clearing out overnight. During the day, fire lines still holding.
No assets are burning within our community and municipality boundary at this time. So we're pretty grateful for that.
The Flin Flon fire is the top of many firefighting priorities as Manitoba contends with more than 20 wildfires, several threatening remote northern communities. This one near Pimicikamak Cross Lake cut off the road south and access to the airport, forcing 5,000 people to the nearest community. The Air Force now helping to fly some out, help Pimicikamak's chief says should have come sooner.
The bureaucracy is so intense, man. They can't get away from it.
The premier declared a state of emergency Wednesday. Currently, more than 170 out-of-province firefighters are helping, with little in the forecast offering hope this will soon improve. As evacuees are registered, the question for many now, what next?
It's a very scary situation for lots of us. So we all have a different story. We're all taking different paths, and we're just trying to stay positive.
Now, evacuation not going so well in some other places tonight. About 100 kilometers north of Flin Flon, Matthias Colomb Cree Nation, which is a fly-in community. Fire has surrounded the airport, smoked it out. Planes can't land there, even military ones. So leadership tonight is telling us they're trying to get hundreds of people out by boat and helicopter.
And Cam, with the risk posed by these fires still so high, I gather the province is taking some extra precautions tonight.
Well, 17,000 evacuees that are being told to come to Winnipeg are being met by hazy skies. Officials are imposing more restrictions in fire-prone areas, canceling all burn permits, even backcountry activities like hiking and even boating. Anything, Adrian, that can cause even the slightest of sparks.
Yeah, smart. All right, Cam McIntosh in Winnipeg. Now in Alberta, more evacuation orders forcing hundreds of residents to get out, including some First Nations west of Fort McMurray.
When the fire changed in Red Earth area, we started thinking, hey, maybe we should try to do something else here.
More than 40 fires are burning across the province. Over half are out of control. In order to get a sense of the weather in the prairies fueling these fires, CBC News meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is here. So, Joe, is the forecast going to change in the coming days?
Adrian, unfortunately, weather could make fire conditions even worse. We have this large dome of hot and dry air sitting right over the prairies. Most temperatures today hit 30 degrees, but tonight a cold front is cutting into that hot air in Alberta. So storms, gusty winds could spark new fires there, but that front won't break the heat in Saskatchewan or Manitoba. Instead, we get that hot, dry weather and windy conditions, very windy Friday through Saturday. So that combination, especially the shifting winds, is exactly what fuels the wildfire spread. So we're also watching the huge volume of smoke being ejected. It's already stretching across to Montana. So I should mention that air quality alerts and poor visibility also likely to continue. And overall, even though there's no rain in the forecast, Adrian, I should say at least by early next week, we will see a good drop in temperatures.
So, Joe, it feels like this might be early, right? An early start to these extreme wildfires.
Yeah, you're right. It is an early start, especially for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Manitoba has seen 3 times the average number of fires so far this year. Saskatchewan almost double its average. A big driver is this persistent drought. We've had low snowpack, low spring winter runoff. It's part of this broader trend we're seeing with climate change, of course, fire seasons starting earlier and being more intense.
All right, meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Turning to other breaking news, a 13-year-old has been arrested after a shocking, fatal stabbing of an elderly woman in the Greater Toronto Area.
After a brief interaction, the suspect stabbed the female in a sadistic and cowardly, unprovoked attack that was captured on video.
It happened this afternoon in her front yard in Pickering, just east of Toronto. Police say the teen didn't know the woman. She was rushed to hospital where she died of her injuries. A manhunt ensued, with Pickering residents being told to shelter in place. The 13-year-old was arrested late tonight. Well, Donald Trump is lashing out on social media tonight, slamming a U.S. trade court that tried to strike down some of his tariffs. Today, an appeals court ruled those tariffs can stay in place for now. Katie Simpson shows us where this battle is headed.
The White House is gearing up for a fight to try to save the president's tariff agenda.
America cannot function if President Trump, or any other president for that matter, has their sensitive diplomatic or trade negotiations railroaded by activist judges.
A federal trade court ruled Wednesday some elements of Donald Trump's trade policy are illegal, though a second court now says tariffs can still be collected while the appeal is underway. This includes border security and fentanyl tariffs imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China, as well as the country-specific tariffs Trump announced on his so-called Liberation Day. The White House says it's ready to take this to the Supreme Court.
And we're going to win on the merits of these cases because we know we are acting within the president's legal and executive authorities.
But the trade court says Trump did not have the authority to impose the measures. It's up to Congress. Still, he remains committed to tariffs no matter the outcome, according to one senior advisor.
So you can assume that even if we lose, we will do it another way.
The fight will not get in the way of making trade deals with other countries, the administration says.
There are little hiccups here or there because of decisions that activist judges make, then it shouldn't just concern you at all. And it's certainly not going to affect the negotiations.
Though analysts worry this setback could affect the mercurial president's mood.
If we have a U.S. president that's on his back foot, feeling defensive, that's a more difficult environment for anyone to be making a trade agreement.
The back and forth undermines U.S. negotiating power as it struggles to cut trade agreements. White House officials have been promising new deals for weeks, and the only thing announced so far is a framework for an agreement with the U.K. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Those tariffs are costing Canada more than $1 billion, and there was relief from the Carney government when it looked like the court struck them down. Kate McKenna shows us the letdown after the appeal court weighed in.
The Prime Minister started his day touting a win.
Mr. Speaker, the government welcomes yesterday's decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which is consistent with Canada's long-standing position that the U.S. IEEPA tariffs were unlawful as well as unjustified.
Wednesday's court decision could mean a multi-billion-dollar tariff reprieve for Canadian goods.
I think it's a good ruling for us. I think, obviously, when the court rules, we should listen.
But by mid-afternoon, a dose of Trump-era reality, when an American appeals court allowed the tariffs to stand, at least for now.
I mean, we went from 24 hours with cautious optimism in terms of the decision, and now we've seen the Court of Appeal taking a different stand.
This is a fluid file that changes all the time, and we just got to be, very nimble and quick.
All this back and forth only compounding uncertainty for businesses and communities.
For us as a business, it's kind of turned everything upside down on its head. We don't know really long-term plans.
The sooner we can have certainty in this, the sooner that upward pressure of cost escalation ends.
Plus, tariffs on some sectors, including auto, aluminum, and steel, aren't covered by the decision, meaning for those industries, there's no end in sight.
You know, the jobs that we're losing, the customers that we're losing, the supply chains that we're getting knocked out of, they may never come back.
The Prime Minister says Canada wants to increase trade with reliable partners, a push to limit the damage from the daily twists and turns.
It therefore remains the top priority of Canada's new government to establish a new economic and security relationship with the United States.
The federal government ends its day where it started, stuck in a trade war with the country's biggest trading partner. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
At the sexual assault trial of 5 former Canadian World Junior hockey players, the defense called its first witness, one of the accused. Katie Nicholson now with what Carter Hart said happened the night in question.
Carter Hart walks into court and into the witness box. So far, the only one of 5 former World Junior hockey players to testify. Hart, Michael McLeod, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote are all charged with sexually assaulting a woman known as EM in a London, Ontario hotel room in June of 2018. They've all pleaded not guilty. Hart was the only player to respond to a text to the team from McLeod, inviting them to his room for a 3-way. "I'm in," he wrote. Hart said McLeod also called him. The gist of the conversation was that Mike was with a girl back at the hotel that wanted to have sex with some of the boys, Hart testified. Hart's lawyer, Megan Savard, asked, "Did you have sexual contact with her there?" Hart replied, "I did." Savard asked, "Was it consensual?" Hart replied, "Yes, it was." It didn't last long, he said, in part because he was uncomfortable. "I do remember making eye contact with somebody. It was just like weird," he said. Notably, Hart gave evidence helpful to former teammate Alex Formanton, saying he and EM held hands when they went to the bathroom to have sex. Cal Foote is alleged to have done the splits naked over EM's face, but Hart testified Foote was fully clothed and that EM was laughing. He also told the court if something disrespectful or degrading happened, he would have stopped it or left. Asked why, he replied, "It's not okay." This criminal lawyer says when there are co-accused, a common strategy is to put one witness up who can help everyone.
Hopefully, only one person, perhaps the most articulate, can testify on behalf of everyone else.
There was a stir in the court as Savard called her client as a witness, seemingly catching the Crown, who had just rested her case, by surprise. Court adjourned early so that the Crown could prepare cross-examination set to begin Friday morning. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, London, Ontario.
There's more uncertainty tonight for foreign students in the U.S.
None of this makes an economic sense. None of it makes policy sense.
Why the Trump administration plans to revoke Chinese student visas. Next. Elon Musk is leaving the White House after a chaotic and controversial time in Washington. Are you kind of firmly of the view that leaving was not his idea? And skaters in BC get a star-studded surprise.
It's so cool that a town like this would build a world-class skate facility.
Their moment with Tony Hawk. We're back in 2. Breaking tonight, the Edmonton Oilers are heading to the Stanley Cup Finals after defeating the Dallas Stars 6-3 for the second year in a row. They've won the Western Conference. They now have a chance to avenge last year's Cup loss to the Florida Panthers and potentially win Canada's first Stanley Cup in more than 30 years. Harvard University is celebrating a legal victory in its battle with the Trump administration, but the White House is broadening its attack, threatening the visas of more than 200,000 Chinese international students. Deanna Sumanek-Johnson shows us the fallout.
Their school under attack. The message at this Harvard graduation ceremony is everyone belongs. As these students celebrate another victory for the Ivy League school, a federal judge extended the ban on Donald Trump's attempt to bar Harvard from enrolling international students.
My program at Harvard is international development. It was built on this exact beautiful vision that humanity rises and falls as one.
This Harvard student from China calling for unity as Trump's administration now takes aim at all Chinese students.
The United States is putting America first by beginning to revoke visas of Chinese students as warranted, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party.
Students in so-called critical fields that may include advanced science, engineering, and medicine may also be targeted. The move gives the White House the power to potentially take away the visas from around 270,000 Chinese students currently in the U.S. That's about a quarter of all foreign students.
I'm getting like at least 1 or 2 or 3 emails a day from our clients saying that, oh, thank you so much for helping me getting my student visa approved. Should I come immediately before they revoke it, or should I not come and wait till August?
Schools have a lot to worry about too. International students pay higher tuitions.
They keep state schools afloat. They keep private schools afloat. None of this makes an economic sense. None of it makes policy sense. The only way this makes any sense is through a nativist lens.
For its part, China calls the move unreasonable, and experts predict that the planned crackdown on Chinese students will also encounter legal obstacles. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Elon Musk says he is leaving DOGE, the U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, a day after criticizing Trump's tax bill.
You know, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill.
Tasked with slashing spending and regulations, Musk made sweeping job cuts across several federal agencies, prompting lawsuits and clashes with other top Trump officials. In a post on X, Musk thanked Trump, saying the DOGE mission will only strengthen over time. Well, Kara Swisher is a veteran U.S. tech journalist who's covered Musk for years, from tech giant to one of Trump's top advisors. I sat down with her today, and part of our conversation was about the timing of Musk's departure. Are you kind of firmly of the view that leaving was not his idea?
I think he does whatever he wants. I think he got to the government, found himself not very effective in terms of finding cuts, and then sort of did everything again in this performative chainsaw-wielding way, which was kind of all about him and nothing about the task. Targeted agencies, a very small amount of agencies that actually give the United States a lot of soft power around the globe, got rid of regulators that are bothering his personal businesses, and then didn't have much savings to speak of. I think he alienated a lot of people in the way he went about it, including his allies, the Republicans, and bothered cabinet members, bullied people, put the center on himself, and then showed very few results for his efforts, and turned out to be the genius bar, I suppose, for the White House, but not really effective.
You can watch for more of our conversation in the coming days on The National. Coming up next, the political climate in the U.S. is prompting some Canadian musicians to cancel their tours there.
It's a cocktail of fear, concern, and confusion.
Why some artists say they don't want to cross the border. Next. And Rosie's here with that issue. Hey, you.
Hey, Adrienne. Tonight we're going to talk about the off and on again Trump tariffs and how that might impact negotiations between the two countries.
Our trading relationship with the United States is still profoundly and adversely threatened.
What could this new development mean for those negotiations? And how did the Prime Minister do in his first question period? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
Well, Canadian music acts are canceling U.S. dates because of anger and even fear of Donald Trump's aggressive policies. This goes well beyond tariffs or even talk of annexation. As Magda Gebrselassie shows us, it can get very personal.
Canadian musicians shine brightly at the Departure Festival, a reimagined Canadian Music Week. But there's also talk of cross-border tension. This as some musicians across the country are canceling their U.S. tours.
I just felt like for my own safety, crossing the border right now is not a good idea.
I found it easy. With the current U.S. political climate, Leslie Hudson worries being non-binary, queer, and Canadian could make them a target. Hudson canceled their U.S. appearances after hearing about this BC woman who spent days in an ICE detention center, and this Halifax folk duo stopped by police in Ohio.
I could have probably kept the tour, but I would just have been stressed the entire time that I was going to be pulled over by someone for nothing, except the fact that I had Ontario on my license plate.
It's a cocktail of fear, concern, and confusion. You know, I think there are...
The president of the Canadian Independent Music Association says they're hearing from many concerned artists. While some trans and Indigenous musicians are canceling U.S. shows, he says most artists are continuing to tour in the U.S.
For many Canadian-owned music companies, Canadian artists, the U.S. market is essential. It's their biggest one.
There's some Canadian artists that have massive fan bases in the States, and they're paying their bills from revenue from that.
Country artist Robert Adam supports those still touring in the U.S. while making the call not to do the same. Adam says it's because of previous negative experiences in the country, the current political climate, and concern from others.
There are straight Canadian musicians that are afraid to go over the border because they're scared that their visas are going to be taken away.
Ready to go.
For now, Adam is focused on rocking stages here in Canada, the UK, and Japan. Magda Gebre-Selassie, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to break down the week in politics. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, Trump's tariffs. A U.S. court blocked many of the president's signature tariffs around the border and fentanyl, a move welcomed by the Prime Minister.
The government welcomes yesterday's decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which is consistent with Canada's long-standing position that the U.S. IEEPA tariffs were unlawful as well as unjustified.
But today, a court ruled those tariffs are staying on, pending more legal arguments, and the tariffs on steel and aluminum and autos still in place. So what does any of this mean for Canada? How might this affect negotiations between the two countries? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. I'm going to start with you tonight, Andrew. Whiplash is the headline that I saw the most in relation to this on-again, off-again tariffs. I'm sure that will make it to its way to the Supreme Court in the United States, but what should we make of this? That at least one court found that what Canada's been saying is true, that these are unjustified and don't make any sense.
Well, and they're not legally justified. The problem is that the president has other potential powers or acts that he could act under, laws he could act under. The broader problem is you've got the elephantine Byzantine U.S. Legal and political system meets a completely lawless autocrat in the face of Donald Trump. You get very unpredictable results. The courts can only go so far. They've certainly ruled correctly in this case that this was an abuse of the emergency powers that are available to them. But the broader problem is the Congress, under previous presidents, yielded presidents this particular power, this ability to levy tariffs, which is supposed to be ordinarily a congressional power. And when the current Congress is not willing to act when the president abuses that power, that's not a very good combination. At some point, either under this president or under future presidents, the Congress is going to have to reclaim that power, place tighter limits on it so that one person, one autocrat, can't simply use these things at his whim. Then you add on top of that President Trump's own on-again, off-again, I'm raising the tariffs to 50% today, I'm lowering them to 20% this afternoon. It makes for an utterly chaotic situation. It certainly doesn't make for sensible negotiations with anybody because you really can't have any assurance that if you make any concession to him, that he will reciprocate in kind.
Sure. Does it give Canada any leverage, Althea, the fact that the court actually said this, although now, of course, they haven't been paused, but at least another court agreed to it?
Now the Court of Appeal has given the president the right to continue for at least a while. Yeah. Look, I think that it allows us to claim some sort of moral victory, but we could have claimed that moral victory yesterday. And those who were opposed to the president's action in the United States, because there are several lawmakers who do agree with Canada and who agree that Congress has the power to review this and believes them to be unjustified. So I don't think it really changes anything. I think if anything, it kind of highlights the volatility of the whole situation and how nothing is really predictable. And perhaps it gives further pause about whether or not we want to deepen that engagement. I mean, the Prime Minister said during the election campaign, when we referred to him as a Liberal leader, that the era of close cooperation with the United States was over when it came to economic and defense matters. And since he has been returned to power with a mandate, that language has disappeared. And if anything, further integration is what he appears to be looking at. So I think that it's upon him to kind of help Canadians understand what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Though he does say cooperation if it makes sense, and no cooperation if it doesn't. He
right, but I'm not sure that he has explained, to a sufficient amount of the extent, why we would engage in the Golden Dome, for example. Why would we renegotiate CUSMA if the president doesn't seem to be abiding by his word, or it takes a while for him to recognize that this agreement that he himself signed carries any weight? So I think there's still a lot of question marks in the mind of most Canadians and, frankly, lawmakers here in Ottawa as well.
Chantal?
Well, you can't change geography, so we're not neighbors to China or India tomorrow. Which basically means that we will always have a relationship of kinds with the United States. There should be no surprise in the notion that the Court of Appeal has paused the ruling. That is how our own system would have worked. Right. So you're not going to get anything from the initial ruling from the Trade Tribunal until it gets to the Supreme Court, and it does nothing to dismiss uncertainty, but it does add arguments. It makes the Trump case a bit more fragile until further notice. Yeah. Does that change anything? I think it does send a signal that maybe the better option is to take one's time to renegotiate rather than to rush into a negotiation. I looked at the impact of yesterday's ruling before it was not before it was paused, on the UK-US deal, and it seemed to have some impact. So maybe the message is let the US dynamics play out and see if it continues to weaken the Trump administration's case before you rush to negotiate something with them.
It did sound anyway, Andrew, as though these were the tariffs that were the ones sort of on the chopping block first in terms of the negotiation between the two sides. And certainly the Prime Minister told David Cochrane earlier this week that they're making some progress in whatever these conversations are that Dominic LeBlanc is leading in Washington.
Yeah, although I think Chantal's point is well taken, that each day that passes, he grows weaker in some ways in this regard. That's the great advantage we have in this, is whatever he can do to us always imposes costs on his own people, and that's not what Republican voters signed up for. So he's doing this, he's burning political capital when he does this, particularly because he does it in such a chaotic fashion. But I also think at the end of the day, that whatever emerges from this is going to be a much more tentative, guarded, hedged type of relationship than we might have been led to believe before Donald Trump came along. The trend, the direction was through closer and closer integration in previous years. I do agree that's over. That I think you can be the strongest free trader you like and the most pro-American you like, but in this situation, not only with Trump, but with whoever comes after him, I think we've now had to face the conclusion that we can't afford to be this exposed, this vulnerable to a trading partner that we cannot rely upon. And that is a fact.
Well, this exposed, this vulnerable, or perhaps this dependent. And that sort of seems to be what the Prime Minister's suggesting. Althea.
I don't know. I feel like something has changed, but I'm not sure if that change will continue for years and decades in the future. Because if anything, I feel like when you look back, we've had moments where we have sought to separate ourselves, and instead we've just become closer. And it's like we pull apart and we get closer. We pull apart and we get closer. And there are many in this political family that believe that actually the key to our success is closer integration with the United States. And I don't think those voices are going to go away. If anything, they're going to be there. Like now, there's more of a cleavage between the sides that I think we're going to start seeing those arguments, maybe not in the short term because now is not the moment. But I think, a year from now, we're going to be talking about closer cooperation militarily. We may be talking more about exit controls with the United States. I think that we are still going to be seeking some form of closer integration, and we're still going to hear those voices calling for even closer integration.
I think we're going to be fighting a rearguard action to avoid being dominated by the Americans on a whole range of fronts. It's not about annexation. But it is about, in my opinion, I think we're going to see Trump attempting to exert control on us on a number of policy fronts, and the agenda for our country is going to be preserving freedom of movement as much as we possibly can, which may be limited, but that will be the agenda.
Last 30 seconds to you, Chantal.
So our main advantage is we just had an election campaign. Well, no one made Canadians believe that we were going to be going into easy times. The Americans did not have those warnings. But bottom line, it's easy to say we will be less dependent, but it's a lot harder to change that relationship and make it work economically for Canada. So I think we need to be really careful about the distance between ambition and reality.
Okay, we're going to leave this block there. That was a good conversation. The next time, it'll be a little lighter. We'll take a look at how Mark Carney handled his first time in question period and one notable absence.
I'd love to be in there. It's a great place. I love the House of Commons. I love the excitement and the thrill.
So how did Mark Carney do in his first time facing off on the opposition? And how were the dynamics without Pierre Poilievre in there? That's next. At issue, the Prime Minister's first question period.
Mr. Speaker, may I first thank my constituents from Nepean for giving me the honor of
But while the session began with jokes,
could you also indulge me to...
It didn't take long for the jabs to begin.
Well, he didn't take long to pick up old Liberal habits of not being able to answer questions.
Outside of the House, the Conservative leader reflected on his new position.
I've never really been a spectator of the House, so but I'm going to work hard to earn the opportunity to do it again.
So how did the PM perform in his first appearance in question period? How are the dynamics different? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, why don't you start us off there? What did you make of how the Prime Minister did and how it felt and looked different, I guess, on that first day?
Yeah, I was in the chamber. He wasn't here today, which I thought was interesting. Second day, you don't show up to the House of Commons. What does that say? But the first day, look, it's hard. The House of Commons is a hard thing to perform at because people are heckling at you. You have time constraints. You might not really know your file. It's kind of a performing art. I will say it did not seem to come naturally to him. I was surprised at the vagueness of his answers and how he kind of like relied on partisan talking points I felt were like fed to him in this question period prep session they do before they talk. One thing that disappointed me was I thought he did a good job during the election campaign responding substantially to the answers from reporters. And when he was asked a question that actually had misinformation in it from the Conservatives, he did not seek to say that that Canada was not collecting any tariffs at all, like that was not true. Instead, he just repeated some vacuous talking points. That I thought was disappointing. I also found it disappointing that he misled the House on his first day by suggesting that this $20 billion tariff estimate was coming from the Conservatives when it came from the Liberals. The Conservatives used the Liberals' numbers. I'm getting into the weeds here, but as everybody knows, I'm a political geek. It made me reflect on how much does he value Parliament. And when you hear from MPs talk about the way he responds in caucus, he seems to feel like it's a barrier to moving quickly on the things that he wants to do. So I think that's something we need to watch out for. The other thing I felt was noticeable was the lack of an NDP voice. You know, who has voice is really important in terms of the issues that get attention. And we talked a lot about pipelines and natural energy projects yesterday. And there wasn't a lot of talk about healthcare or any of the left-wing issues that the NDP usually puts forward. So how will the Liberals position themselves as Goldilocks when they're only being pressed on one side, basically?
Chantal, how did you think Prime Minister Carney did?
He didn't look like a deer caught in the headlights. No. So I guess that's your first line. I agree with Althea. Handling question period takes practice, and I don't expect someone to show up and look like he's a pro at this. So on that basis, it kind of feels like we're commenting on something that most Canadians don't really give a damn about. To be truthful.
Yes.
And I am not saying this as a way to say Parliament doesn't matter, but I do not believe that the serious business of Parliament happens in question period. So I will cast judgment on whether Mark Carney realizes that Parliament matters when I see legislation and the timeline on it versus the reality that we do want every party and the two houses to have a say in whatever major legislation comes forward.
I can imagine what Andrew's going to say, but I'm just going to let him say it.
Well, you're ahead of me then. I've got conflicting views on this. First of all, as bad as question period is, and Mark Carney not answering the questions is in the rich tradition of ministers generally, and we saw that including from his fellow ministers. You know, François-Philippe Champagne got huge cheers from the Liberal caucus by basically bellowing out talking points that had nothing to do with the questions that had been asked him. So it's hard to fault Carney if he was coached, basically, don't answer the questions. It's a little different when you're being questioned by the press. The questions are, I may put myself out on a limb here, but can be presumed to be a little bit more in good faith than they are when they're coming from the opposition benches. Sure. That has its upsides and its downsides. The nastiness of question period is usefully humbling to ministers. Mm-hmm. If Donald Trump had to face not the White House press corps, who are egregious in their fawning, even when they're supposedly against an adversary like Donald Trump, but if he had to stand up in a parliament and answer questions and heckles from determined opponents, I think he'd be in a different position than he is. So it's good to see somebody with a high opinion of himself like Mark Carney have to subject him to this. I agree with Althea. I hope he subjects himself more. I'm not one of those that says, oh, he's not having a prime minister's question period where he answers all the questions, therefore that's letting the side down. I'd like to see answers from other ministers if we're going to treat cabinet government as anything real. But he should certainly be in the House most days and should certainly be ready to answer questions, and I hope his performance will improve over time.
Okay, I need quick words from all three of you on the fact that Pierre Poilievre was not there, that he had to do that little scrum outside, and whether that changed anything inside the House materially. Althea?
No.
That's it.
You said quick words.
Yeah, I know, but that was quick even for you. I mean, he did seem to be pained that he wasn't in there because we all know that he likes it. That's his space.
That's what he's been doing for 20 years. That's all he knows.
That's
so
right.
of course he misses it. He misses his friends. He misses the action. He misses the theater. He misses being in the spotlight.
I thought it looked good on him, frankly. I think he's had a good few days. He's been more cooperative, more cheerful, and more humble. So he's had a humbling experience of losing that seat and being locked out of the House of Commons. Sometimes that can improve people's perceptions of, particularly if you're viewed as being kind of arrogant and overbearing. This was a nicer Pierre Poilievre to listen to.
Chantal?
I understand that Pierre Poilievre expected to come back to this parliament in the prime minister's role. So somewhere or somehow I thought maybe there was a kindness in the losing the seat experience, in the sense that, yes, I understand he's been doing this for 20 years. I understand he likes it, but that was not what he expected to happen. And I think probably it's not a bad thing that he gets to sit out these first few months where you're back in the same job, questioning someone who beat you.
I never thought of it that way. It'll give him a little space to reflect before he gets into the House again. Okay, thank you all. That was a good conversation. I appreciate it. That is at issue on the National. We're going to continue this conversation, though, and we'll talk more about the Prime Minister's nation-building projects that he wants to discuss with the premiers next week. You can catch that on YouTube or the At Issue podcast. And with that, I'll send things back to Adrian in Toronto.
Up next, a skateboarding legend drops in on a BC skate park.
My favorite skater is Tony Hawk.
No way, the Birdman.
Tony Hawk draws a crowd. Next in our moment. You're looking at a skate park in the small mountain town of Smithers, BC, and that is a big name in skateboarding, the one and only Tony Hawk. So Hawk made a surprise appearance to help celebrate an expansion of the park and do what he does best. Tonight, his visit makes our moment.
What do you think of it?
I think it was pretty hype. It was awesome, man.
It was awesome.
Definitely a good event.
It's so cool that a town like this, relatively small town, would build a world-class skate facility. Basically, they said, hey, do you want to come check out the new expansion of the Smithers skate park? Timing worked, and I got some of my team together and got on a plane and ended up here. When I started skating, it was my salvation. I mean, that's where I found my sense of belonging, my sense of community. I mean, if you go to a skate park, almost any town, you'll find people from all walks of life. They are enjoying the space. all at the same time.
My favorite skater is Tony Hawk.
No way, the Birdman.
I never imagined it would be like this, where it's encouraged by parents, where communities will support it. And so to live in this time, to actually witness it, and then to be able to participate, it's beyond any dream that I could have.
Huge move, huge park, huge crowd, and that is a very big deal. Tony Hawk told the organizers that when he was a kid, he would have to hide his skateboard to make sure he wasn't bullied. How times have changed, and largely thanks to him. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the Nationals YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.